Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the CatsHQ Podcast. I'm John Hale, the UK football beat writer for the Courier-Journal, sitting alongside Fletcher Page, the basketball beat writer for the Courier-Journal. We delayed this podcast by a day from our normal Monday episode, hoping to get in our thoughts from the premiere of John Calipari's 30 for 30 documentary that showed last night at the Kentucky Theater, Monday night in Lexington. Thinking that would give us a nice little bit of a topic to fill up this weekly 30 to 45 minutes we give you all. But in the meantime, all sorts of news is broken, and we're going to have trouble fitting it all in now. Not only do we have 30 for 30 reactions, Kentucky and John Calipari got a commitment this afternoon from four-star shooting guard Jamal, even though it's spelled Jamarl, but I guess it's Jamal, judging on the internet, Baker from California, kind of answering that shooting woe in the 2017 basketball class. Then spring football, of course, still going on. We've got a kind of rant from offensive coordinator Eddie Gran after the offensive struggles in the scrimmage on Saturday that I was at for the open practice. And then this morning, Tuesday, Drew Barker talked at spring football practice, gave his first interview press conference since his season-ending injury in the third game of last season. So we got all that to talk about today. Let's start off, though, with the big news of the commitment. Fletcher, you were all over this afternoon. We talked last week and the week before that Kentucky needed to add another guard. They needed to add a shooter, and it appears that they found that in Jamal Baker.
Yeah, they obviously, the turnover in the backcourt for Kentucky was created a desperate situation, and I think you got to like the way now the class lines up with Quade Green taking over at the point guard position, Hamidou Diallo at shooting guard, and he's more of a slasher. Both of those guys are elite players, but now you bring in Jamal Baker, maybe a little bit better shooter, another body type skill set. So again, I've kind of harped on this probably a lot, but I like the diversity in the backcourt Kentucky had last year in terms of experience levels and skill sets. And I don't see Kentucky having that kind of ideal situation maybe for the next couple seasons. I have to see how it shakes out with recruiting. They certainly won't have that diversity in 27-18, but this is how you start kind of constructing it.
Yeah, and Baker, he led the Under Armour circuit last summer and made threes, and he had 41 threes. So obviously he's a good shooter, immediately becomes the best shooter on the team, I would assume. We'll see how much that translates into minutes. He's obviously got a bunch of five-star McDonald's All-American guys in front of him. He is one of two four-star kind of backup guards with Shai, however you say his name, Alexander. He'll be in Louisville this week at the Derby Classic that you're going to go to practice one day, talk to those guys. Mark Smith, the other guy that Kentucky offered last week, Mr. Illinois Basketball, is also going to be at the Derby Classic. We'll see if he's still a factor now that Baker has a commitment. It would be hard to imagine both those guys coming, but you never know. Cam Johnson, the graduate transfer from Pitt, who's a sharpshooter, 6'8", kind of guard/small forward, is also still out there. Kentucky's offered him. If you're going to take another one of those guys, to me, it makes more sense to take Johnson because of his kind of veteran leadership. But maybe Smith's still on the board, so I'll be interested to see when you go to Louisville for those practices what he says about Baker's commitment and how that affects his recruitment. Right,
yeah, I've worked all for the past few months with the number 8 in mind for the amount of kids that they could take in this class. I think you're going to hold a spot for Mohamed Bamba and Kevin Knox, and depending on who else might leave Kentucky, I do not think we've seen the end of attrition for Kentucky's current roster, and we can talk more about that later. But yeah, Cam Johnson makes a lot of sense. Like you said, he's a veteran, but also there'll be some class separation. You have a guy that come in for 2 years. It might not always be ideal to have 8 kids in the same class coming in together. And it's interesting because as it currently stands, I don't see Kentucky having a one and done next season on the roster. Now, I think Nick Richards has got a lot of upside. There are a few of these kids. Maybe Hamidou Diallo would be.
Right, and Bamba, of course, would be
if he came.
Bamba, yeah.
As it currently stands, though, they've got some kids that project to be 2, 3, 4-year players.
Yeah, I think, and obviously Baker's going to be one of those guys. You'd be shocked to see him leave after a year. He's a developmental kind of player. Cam Johnson, if he came, would have 2 years of eligibility left. We've talked a lot about it on the podcast. We've written about it on the website and in paper. John Calipari was not a fan of graduate transfers during the tournament. Twice he kind of ranted against those guys. The first time in Indianapolis in the first weekend, he got asked what was wrong with mid-majors in the tournament, why we didn't see as many upsets this year in that first weekend as we normally do. And he unprovoked, brought up the fact that the graduate transfer rule was hurting mid-majors because those programs were investing in those players for 3-4 years and then losing them to big programs when they graduated and were able to leave early. That the token or the number one example of that is Bruiser Flint losing. This name escapes me now, but the kid from Drexel who went to Louisville. Drexel struggled, misses the tournament. Bruiser Flint, a former Calipari assistant, gets fired. And I think that kind of soured Calipari on it. The second weekend in Memphis, I asked him about it again, basically to get more clarification as to whether, he took Julius Mays for that 2012-13 team that went to the NIT as a graduate transfer from Wright State. So obviously he didn't have a problem with it then. What had changed over the course of it, and did that mean he wasn't going to take another one? And he went on another rant about how it hurt mid-majors and it hurts coaches. But he did say it's bad for the players. He said if they let them transfer, just make them sit out like everybody else. He alleged that mid-major programs, especially now, were trying to prevent kids from graduating so they couldn't lose them. I don't know if that's true. That seems kind of like a crazy claim on the surface. But overall, it seems like his biggest problem is the mid-major aspect of this. So the fact that Cam Johnson would come from Pitt, which is obviously not a mid-major, the coach he committed to, Jamie Dixon, is not there anymore. Kevin Stallings took over that program. Do you think that's enough justification for Calipari to kind of get around this whole rant against graduate transfers he's had over the last month?
Yeah, I really disagree with most of what Calipari said about this because I'm in favor of movement and mobility, and so I think on this one, I guess there's enough loopholes or technicalities for Calipari himself to be vindicated or justified or whatever. But for me, I don't buy into it at all, and I think that a grad transfer is exactly what this Kentucky team needs most in terms of bringing in a veteran, bringing in somebody that has played at a high level, played in the ACC conference in this instance with Cam Johnson. So I understand maybe him taking up for friends or coaches in the business at the mid-major level, but you had to know that one day down the road this situation could come up, and that's kind of where he's at now.
And it runs kind of counter to almost everything that Cal stands for as a coach with the one and done program. And I assume also if he takes Cam Johnson, another justification we'll hear, as we have with the one and done now for 6 or 7 years. Cal says, I don't like this rule, but I'm going to use it when we have it. And I assume that we'll hear something similar about graduate transfers if Cam Johnson ends up here. But it seems so counter for him to be all about players, making the most of their situations. And if a guy goes to school for 3 years and graduates in time in 3 years, I'm with you. I think he should be able to go wherever he wants to. That's the reward for doing that and putting in that work and being the student athlete everybody criticizes that has lost from college basketball these days. That one and done topic and Calipari's kind of skirting the traditional maybe ideas of college basketball is obviously the theme of this 30 for 30, one and not done. It's going to air Thursday on ESPN. We got to see the premiere last night in Lexington at the Kentucky Theater Monday night. John Calipari was there, as was the entire team except for Isaac Humphries, Dominique Hawkins, and Derek Willis, and we'll talk about what that might mean later. But your general takeaways from the documentary and what you thought of the film.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. And as with most of these 30 for 30s or any sports documentary, I'm a sucker for them. I enjoy the backstory. I enjoy the history and all that. I did think that the film, I don't want to say it lacked a lot or anything, but I think it missed a chance maybe to take us into some communities and maybe fully explain kind of the transformation that some of these kids went through from going. I think 22 former Calipari players, 22 Calipari players turned pro after their freshman year, and all 22 of them were drafted in the first round. So that means all 22 of them got guaranteed millions. Right. So it's not a reckless system. It's not a system that's got like a tragic story or a bad decision was made or bad judgment came into play. This is a very efficient and very proven system. So I would have liked to have maybe seen a little bit more of, where DeMarcus Cousins came from and where his family is now and things like that. And I understand that you've only got so much time, but I thought they might have missed that a little bit. But seeing how young he was at UMass, seeing sort of the intensity with which he coached and maybe the way he kind of shook up the establishment, all that stuff I thought was pretty fascinating. There was a lot of humor involved, I thought. There were some pretty funny moments. There were some intense moments, obviously, with John Chaney and his NBA days. So I thought it was good. I think it might have lacked maybe a little bit of maybe heart, I would say, a little bit more emotion I would have liked to have seen. But I think the moment of that, of the 30 for 30 is when he breaks down in front of his players at right before he gives the Hall of Fame speech. That emotion, it was just, I found myself sort of wanting more of those real moments, and I don't know if it quite hit with enough of those, but I thought overall it was really good.
Yeah, for me, the most interesting parts were the early days of his coaching career, and I'm sure a lot of that has been said before, especially when he was at UMass and Memphis as a young and upcoming coach. I think that part of his story has probably gotten lost a little bit since he came to Kentucky, because at that point in his career, all the narrative was about what he'd already done and the controversy with the vacated Final Fours, so on and so forth. But for me, it was somewhat new and interesting to see him as a young assistant at Pitt and recruiting guys, and to hear from Phil Martelli or from St. Joe's and some other coaches from the A-10 just about how he went into those homes and shook up recruiting as a young assistant, which is a side we don't see of Calipari as much now. Now his recruiting, he's always, kind of viewed as the guy who just walks in and half the recruiting is just showing up for John Calipari and putting his face in the door. That was not always the case. So I thought that was really cool. I thought the stories about the 5-star camps when he was a young coach and how he went to Clarion and he got a basketball scholarship, but he pretty much knew immediately he was not going to be an NBA player, so he wanted to be a high school coach and a teacher, and how he just showed up at the 5-star camps at Robert Morris, which were, across the street basically from where he grew up, and got a job working there just by being willing to do a shooting drill one day for Howard Garfinkel. I thought that was a really cool story. And just to see that phase of his career, I thought was really interesting, a side we didn't see. My biggest criticism was kind of what you said earlier. It did feel a little bit like there was a time crunch, and it was long. I mean, it's probably close to 2 hours, the film total. But it felt a little rushed to me at the end. There was so much about his up-and-coming career in terms of how he got started, which I thought was really interesting. Like I said, how he built UMass. Almost half the film, I would think, is about him building UMass from nothing to there, to getting to the NBA, to getting fired, and then Memphis, to almost to the point where the Kentucky stuff, it feels like it's just kind of crammed in there at the end. And the actual one and done stuff doesn't really even feel like it's a part of the film until the last 30 minutes. And the title of the documentary is One and Not Done. So you would think that's the biggest focus. And it doesn't get there at the end. I think part of that is the time. Part of it is the season they followed Kentucky around was the 2015-16 year. And obviously that turned out to be his second worst team in terms of season finish that he had at Kentucky. So if they had a team that had made a Final Four run or had made it to the championship game or won a title even, then you get to see a lot more of the on-campus stuff, to whereas last year, I mean, it's not that exciting to talk about the team that finished in the second round. I mean, come on, the most exciting moment from that season, they spend 10 minutes in the film talking about that Texas A&M game where Isaac Humphrey spikes the ball at the end, gets a technical foul, and Calipari comes into the locker room afterwards and says, "Don't worry about it, you guys got cheated," which was an interesting takeaway. And you got to see some moments that maybe shed a lot on that team, just inside the huddle. And some of the interactions he had with Scal this year are super awkward in that film. I'll be interested to see how they react to that. If I'm an opposing coach, that's the one part of the movie that I'm zeroing in on in terms of negative recruiting for Calipari, just because he is really hard on Scal at several moments in that film. I think at one point in a huddle, they show him saying, "You're not rebounding. Why is he not rebounding?" Well, he doesn't care about winning. That's why he's not. If he cared about winning, he'd rebound. And then just to see Scal, which we saw all throughout the season, just confidence crushed. And now to know what he's doing in the NBA and how he's blossomed this year without Calipari around, I would think that's the one kind of negative that's going to come out of this for him in Kentucky.
I think you're spot on, though. It doesn't feel balanced. And you're right. It does feel like they try to kind of cram in the one and done stuff and the Kentucky stuff. It's real quick, and I don't want to get too deep, and I sort of wrote about this at Courier-Journal.com, is that Cal has a narrative that I think you see in music or art or in movies, and it's a pretty easy narrative to sort of frame up. Outsider, poor, humble beginnings, does it his way, and ends up succeeding. But that took decades. And I think what really stood out to me in that whole thing was just how Cal was able. A lot of times you get in these situations where, you're coaching. If you're an assistant at Kansas or an assistant in that, in a big conference or becoming a head coach, you kind of, and I think we all have to deal with this in our lives and in our careers. Sometimes you feel like you're supposed to do things a certain way, or maybe you need to act this way, or you're going against who you are to try to fit in with who you're working around. And Cal, to me, just accepted who he was. He used what made him different, turned that into a strength. He wasn't afraid to be confident. Wasn't afraid to be, speak loudly and say things and use his emotion, be vulnerable, be himself. And so I thought that was kind of the ultimate message, was sort of Cal taking his personality, making his basketball program sort of perform and function the way that he did as a person, and then that decades-long sort of struggle for validation, because he made these great runs and had great rivalries and was in part of many great basketball moments. An underrated one, I think, is the Sweet 16 game against Kentucky at UMass, which is the game before the biggest game ever. That was a great game, but he just couldn't quite win it all, and it just whether he admits this, and I think he did a little bit after the show, just how tough it was to watch. The critics are one thing, but that self, I think the conflict within himself to sort of not be afraid to put himself out there, but then also ultimately not quite getting the reward, and it took a long time. I thought that narrative kind of resonated.
Yeah, for sure. And the one moment that stuck with me in terms of justifying the one and done stuff, which we talked about, maybe they had not done a good enough job of showing where some of these people came from, and just the way that the NBA has changed their lives by even being able to get those guaranteed contracts. I think part of the one moment that stuck out to me is the DeJuan Wagner stuff from Memphis, in terms of he was a kid who was the best recruit in the country, whatever, went to Memphis, starred there for a year, wanted, or said in the documentary, that he was considering coming back because he wanted to win, he wanted to do all these other things, and Cal said, no, you have to leave. You need to go, and he goes to the NBA, gets a one-year deal, ends up coming down with colitis, I think is what it was. His career ends at 21, and then he's done. And if he had not left that year, if that had happened to him at Memphis, does he ever get that chance? Does he ever make that life-changing money? And I thought that was an interesting point. But to your point earlier, I mean, they could have done that with guys like Cousins. John Wall's in the documentary a lot, talking about where he came from in North Carolina, but Scal would have been another great guy. I mean, the dude survived an earthquake in Haiti. He was trapped under the rubble in Haiti in an earthquake. Comes from that to Kentucky, struggles for a year, is not the player anybody wanted him to be, but still has the chance to go pro, make that life-changing money. And now he's proving himself in the NBA. Obviously, Scal's kind of awakening moment in the NBA probably came after this documentary was mostly finished. They did get a nice Devin Booker cameo at the end there, which I wonder if they added after his recent kind of showing up of his 70-point game and all that. But I thought there were some missed opportunities there with some of the Kentucky guys. I'll be interested to see how those players react to it when they see it, especially Scal. He's the one guy who was really interested in me. And the other guy is Isaac Humphries, in terms of they bring that Texas A&M game back up at that moment. Humphries was not there last night. Everybody else, underclassmen on the team, were in the room at the Kentucky Theater. De'Aaron Fox was there. Malik Monk was there. Isaiah Briscoe was there. Bam Adebayo was there. All those guys have already declared for the draft. Bam has not signed with an agent, so he might come back. So Humphries was the one guy who is technically still on the team who was not there last night. We do not know why. He could have been at class. He could have had some other obligation. Should people read into anything there? Obviously, he's the name on this team that people are still kind of circling as to maybe is more likely than not to come back, just because what he said to you and a couple outlets during the tournament about evaluating his options, possibly being able to go back to Australia and go pro. I at least think it's worthy of note that he was not there last night.
Yeah, and I don't like to speculate about these kinds of things. It's one thing to speculate about a kid that's going to the NBA draft, but I did put in my draft or transfer tracker that I predicted that Isaac would leave Kentucky. I stand by that just from my reporting and some of the things that I've been told from people around the program. But I know it's been a difficult time for Isaac because he said it himself. It was a disappointing sophomore season, didn't live up to his expectations, and then he's going to have to kind of face that all over again if he stays at Kentucky. It goes from how can you play with Bam Adebayo to how do you fit in with Nick Richards, or on and on down the list. So I certainly don't blame him for checking out his options via transfer or maybe professionally overseas. But like you said, it's pretty telling when the entire team, and even Michael Mulder, an exiting seniors there, he's not, I guess, Dominique and Derek Willis
are on their autograph tour around the state. Derek, I know, has the Portsmouth Invitational coming up. So those guys probably had something going on. And I think both of them may have already graduated so I don't know if they're still on campus or what the rule is there. But those two guys were not there either. But in terms of guys who are still technically on the roster, Humphreys was the only guy who wasn't there.
I think it's pretty telling.
So the other three guys we mentioned there, I think right after we recorded last week's episode, De'Aaron Fox declared for the draft, became the first guy. The next day, Malik Monk declared. Bam Adebayo declared, did not sign with an agent, so he has the option to come back. Isaiah Briscoe declared, did sign with an agent, which I know we had talked about both of those guys, that being the really interesting decision with them. Any of those decisions surprise you, or anything maybe that jumped out from that week of news we've gotten so far?
Yeah, I think that Isaiah is always going to be probably the most polarizing decision here, not just for the simple fact he's not listed in any mock drafts.
Right.
And then I think Bam Adebayo did the smart thing, not hiring an agent. If you look at it, that 2018 draft is nowhere near the amount of talent it has of right now as the 2017 draft. So I keep seeing these mocks, and I only use Draft Express and NBADraft.net. I know everybody's got a preference, but if I click on everyone that I can, Sports Illustrated and SB Nation, all these drafts, none of the I don't want to call those fringe drafts, but all the recent publication drafts I've been looking at, Bam's not in the first round of any of those. Now, he is in the first round of the ones I use. Like I said, Draft Express is the one I prefer. NBADraft.net, he's in those. But there, again, is a range of opinions there. Draft Express has him at 30th. NBADraft.net has him at 21st and falling. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if he goes to the Combine and just has a so-so showing. I think he looks great. If he plays great at the Combine, he'll go. If he just has a decent showing there, though, he might be in a position where if he's looking at that 2018 draft, could move himself way up if he stays.
I think it's an interesting conversation that I've seen it on a couple message boards and on Twitter, social media the last week. If you had to pick, assuming it's an either or, because I think it's hard to envision a scenario where both happen for Kentucky. A sophomore Bam Adebayo, who's had a whole year, came on obviously very well at the end of the season, or a freshman Mohamed Bamba, who might be the best big man in the class, or one of the two or three best big men, has an insane wingspan, would appear to be that have the talent to be the best kind of shot blocker, defensive stopper in the post that they've had since Willie Cauley-Stein or Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, those kind of players. Which do you want? Freshman Mohamed Bamba, sophomore Bam Adebayo, assuming you can only get one?
I'll take Bam, and maybe for a different reason than most would. Is I think that we talked about this and we debated it about Isaiah Briscoe coming back. Is you need a veteran, you need somebody that can show all these now maybe 7, 8, 9 recruits coming in. You need somebody to show them how to work, so show them what kind of effort and intensity it takes in practice. And I think Bam is the hardest working basketball player that I've covered at the college level, hands down. I showed up to Rupp Arena 3 hours before every game, and he was out there shooting 2 hours before every single home game. So I would take Bam for his leadership, his veteranness, and but Bamba, with his 9'6" standing reach and 7'9" wingspan, that'd be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bamba's the better player, but in terms of Kentucky's team, I think I'd probably lean your way too in saying that a sophomore Bam would be better for that team. Just because if you get a sophomore Bam, and assuming they don't get Bamba, you still got Nick Richards as an athletic post player. You'd still have Sasha Kalea-Jones, a former 5-star recruit post player, on the roster, presumably, who might be able to have a bigger role. You theoretically would have Ty Wynyard. And we talked about Isaac Humphreys. Maybe that opens the door more for Humphreys to come back. That would weigh in his decision. Who knows? But you'd have other post options, so it wouldn't be just Bam. Whereas if Bamba comes, I mean, that kid's probably going to play 37 minutes a game or something like next season, you would think, down the stretch. So I tend to agree. I think sophomore Bam outweighs freshman Bamba, but that will be interesting. I think both of us probably, I almost speak for you. For me, I'm still guessing Bam goes, Bamba comes. Anything has changed with you in terms of that
Not
prediction?
yet, but apparently Texas is it's kind of gone in waves here. Kentucky was the favorite for Bamba for the past month or so. Now it seems like Texas is making a big push, and then and with Kevin Knox, obviously, I think North Carolina might be in the driver's seat. But Missouri's been an interesting player that's emerged since Coach Martin showed up there.
It'll be interesting to see with these two guys how they perform, Knox and Bamba, when they get to school next year, as to whether they're worthy of this hype or if it's a case where because they're the last two guys, they're getting so much more attention. Think Marcus Bolden last year, where Kentucky fans obsessed about whether Bolden was going to come to Duke or come to Kentucky for months. They ended up losing him to Duke, and he was kind of a non-factor for most of the year at Duke, and now he's going to come back for his sophomore year, so he was not a one-and-done player. I don't think that's the case with Bamba. Just those measurables seem to me like that kid's a lock kind of lottery pick next year, and a candidate to be the best freshman in the country. Knox may be a little bit different, but it'll be interesting to see how those guys move on. Anything else from NBA decisions, recruiting, 30 for 30 that stands out to you before we shift a little bit to spring football here?
No, not really. I will say, though, that I did find it interesting that a lot of the odds makers had Kentucky picked as the favorite to win the title next year. A lot of what are they called? Way too early top 25s had Kentucky at the top. And just given what we're talking about here, we're debating things that are pretty deep in the matrix. But I think that it might be a frustrating at times season for Kentucky, but figuring out how they're going to assemble all this athleticism, if Bamba shows up especially, it's going to be intriguing to watch. And I guarantee you at times will be frustrating.
I agree completely that the number one ranking is ridiculous at this point for Kentucky, considering how many unknowns there are. The fact that at the moment it feels like their entire team's going to be freshman dominated with maybe one sophomore or a graduate transfer who's also going to be new to the program in there. That seems to be reason enough for me to knock them down a couple spots. I will say, though, when you get Baker, who's one of the better shooters in the class, if they add Cam Johnson, who's a great shooter and a veteran, then it becomes much easier to start seeing this hype getting out of control by the time it gets to November.
Yeah, Calipari, looking at the way he's aged since his days at UMass, bringing in teams like this and trying to make them play this quickly, I would say it puts many years on Calipari.
Let's shift focus a little bit now to spring football. Saturday was the open scrimmage at Kentucky. It was the first open practice that we had gotten to see this spring. They let the media in. It was not open to the public. We were told it was a scrimmage. It ended up actually being mostly a regular practice for about an hour and a half. And in the last 25 to 30 minutes, they scrimmaged a little bit. The takeaway being the offense was terrible during this 25-minute scrimmage. I think there was one drive where they had multiple first downs. They did not score. A couple turnovers. Tobias Gillum, redshirt freshman defensive back, intercepted. Gunnar Hope, the second-string quarterback right now. Benny Snell fumbled. And there were a couple more passes that could have easily been picked off that went off defensive backs' hands. So it was a really bad finish to the practice for the offense. That being said, the first hour and a half, from all indications, was very good for the offense. It's much harder to judge that for me at least, from the naked eye, because it's a lot of drills. There's some 7-on-7 here and there, but it's and some red zone and stuff. And I did see them score one play in the red zone, so they were apparently pretty happy with that. But you get to the end, it's awful. We talked to Eddie Graham. We're going to try something new here and play a little bit of sound on the podcast. This is an edited version of what spliced up a couple comments here from Eddie Grant after the scrimmage. I don't know if you've heard this yet. You were out of town. But Eddie did not mince words in describing how that end of that practice went.
No, it hasn't. I think they're drinking some Kool-Aid, and it's bad Kool-Aid, and I got to get them to quit drinking it. So we'll get that fixed. It was an absolute joke. Non-competitive. They just didn't recover. They thought they were just going to go out there and keep doing what they're doing, but people are going to change, and they recovered and we didn't. Third thing that we talked about this morning before we came out, just do your job. We got some guys that are just not doing their job, and we got to get that fixed. It's all fixable, but it's just disappointing when you come out and you practice that well for an hour and a half and then you piss away. I mean, the next, you can edit that, please. And then you You come out for an hour and a half, and then you take the last 20 minutes, and you don't do so well. So that's disappointing. We can't. I thought we were above that and beyond that. Yeah, they whipped us. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, their 11 whipped our 11. You know, for an hour and a half today, we whipped them. For the last 20, we got smoked.
Anybody you like today on your side of the
No. No, it was not good enough. We got no chance if we practice like that last 20 minutes. If we'll practice and do what we did the first hour and a half, we'll be really a good football team. There was nobody good. There was nobody good. Now, for the first hour and 30 minutes, I thought, to be honest with you, I thought everybody was good. Quarterbacks threw, our receivers caught, we protected. I thought we were really good. We ran the ball physical, big plays, but the last 20, 0. So however you want to spin that in the paper, okay?
Can you at least use this as a kind of wake-up call for the final week of practice?
Yeah, it's time to drink new Kool-Aid.
So let's spin this in the paper now, like Eddie Grant told us to. You've covered a bunch of football at better programs than Kentucky historically, Georgia specifically. Anything that we should actually worry about in spring or take from an offensive coordinator rant in spring practice and apply to the fall?
I don't think so. Usually the hyperbole goes the other way in spring. I used to have this team that at UGA, I call them the spring ball all-stars, because usually you'll have a few players that just do these off-the-charts things, and the coaches rave about them, and then come fall, you don't really hear much from them. So for it to go this way, I thought at first I was gonna tweet back at you. I was following your tweets on Saturday that I thought it was encouraging for the defense to be playing at such a level, because coming into spring I thought they were the unit with the most to gain, and the offense had a little bit more solidified. But to hear Eddie Grant go that extreme with it, I thought that might have been a little bit more troubling than what I had first seen as an encouraging sign for the defense. Kind of turned into an odd, maybe just off day for the offense.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mark Stoops took that approach, and he's always going to be a guy who his mood reflects how the defense plays most day after practice, just because as a former defensive coordinator, longtime defensive backs coach, that's the side of the ball he's most comfortable with. And when his defense is really bad, those are the days we tend to see Mark really go into nuclear mode in interviews afterwards. But he came out after the scrimmage and said, it was pretty good. You know, the defense has gotten much better the last 2 days. This is what we've been seeing on Thursday and Saturday. I will say I talked to Derek LeBlanc, the new defensive line coach, on Thursday, and he told me that day, unrelated to this, that he thought they had a breakthrough practice for the defensive line, and that's what Mark Stoops said Saturday, and that it was a very encouraging day for the guys up front, which is the position with the most questions on the roster this spring. So that's interesting. I will say, though, the thing for me that pushes it more to offensive struggles and farther away from defense improving is the fact that Denzel Ware, starting Jack linebacker, was at a funeral. Mike Edwards, the starting safety, probably the best player on the defense, was at a wedding. So that's 2 of your 3 best players on defense. Jordan Jones, the third guy in that group, was out for a couple series, dealing with something on the sideline. So to have those 3 guys, 2 of them not there at all, one of them kind of a partial participant not going, and to see guys farther down the depth chart still dominate your first-team offense, that's worrisome for me because I don't think the depth on defense is that good yet to where those guys should be able to do that against an offense that I think everybody thinks is going to be pretty good in the fall. And as you heard Eddie Grant say there, I think it has some potential. If they play the way they're supposed to, they can be a very, very good offense. That was obviously not the case Saturday. Still, though, even thinking that it was an offense struggles day, I don't think that matters at all for the fall. Tuesday, today, we're recording this. We heard Eddie Grant again today. Said that they responded the way they wanted to. They were much better today, which is what you would expect after one of these rants. We've seen it during the season when Mark Stoops will come out and rip his team on a Tuesday, and on Saturday they'll play pretty well. This coming in April, to me, has no impact on what's going to happen in August. The one thing, though, I did take away from Saturday that I thought was a very important development is what Stephen Johnson said when he came out and talked after Eddie Grant, and we asked him about what Eddie had said in his post-game.
He said he was looking for guys to bring that energy at the end of the practice. How much is that on you? Just
it's all on me. I mean, this is my offense. This is my team. I have to be able to bring our guys up when we're in a little lull like that. So that's really all on me. For me, not being able to pick those guys up. So.
This is my offense. This is my team. That's what Steven said there. We've not heard him be that confident in that role thus far, at least publicly. We've said many times in this podcast and in many stories, whatever, that he looked like a guy who had taken control of the locker room, especially in Jacksonville and that bowl prep stuff. He apparently, to me, is completely in that role now. I don't think there's any quarterback controversy at all. We're going to talk about Drew Barker here in a minute because he did interviews today for the first time since his injury. But Steven's the starting quarterback on this team. Steven's the captain, to me, on this team. And to hear him say that after the scrimmage and take on that onus, because we heard today from Darren Hinshaw that Steven, of all the guys, was actually not that bad in the scrimmage. Hinshaw said he was doing what he was supposed to do, but he's taking on that role and realizing that if your left tackle or your right tackle or your receiver or your running back or somebody makes a mistake, you need all 11 guys, and the quarterback's job is to take that blame on himself. I thought that was a huge development to hear Steven talk that way Saturday.
Right, and for everything that this offense has coming back, they are looking at they're losing Boom Williams, lost Jeff Badette, two pretty explosive playmakers, but more importantly, probably for what you're talking about, lost John Toth to the NFL draft and the senior. He was a senior last year, so very organically though, this has become Steven Johnson's team. You can't just have a quarterback come in and be inserted after an injury and become a leader. It takes some time, and he had some fumble issues. They lost a few close games in the fall, but they won a few close games, and you've talked about this in the past too, just the way that he was during the bowl experience, being able to sort of mix and mingle with the offensive guys, even some of the defensive guys. He's very progressively and really it just feels real natural. And now he's to a point now months down the road where he's saying, okay, now this is my team, because he has kind of earned the right to be able to say that.
Yeah, and take it as you will. We don't know that these things are related. You can read into this what you want, but Steven said that on Saturday. Today is Tuesday, 2-3 days later. And Drew Barker today did a press conference for the first time since he got injured against New Mexico State, or at least since the injury culminated against New Mexico State. Missed the rest of the season. Did not play in the bowl, has been a limited participant in spring practice, did some position drills before spring break, and since spring break has done some 7-on-7. They've put him in some scrimmage live situations here and there, a series here, a series there, to kind of limit his way, get some rust off. For whatever reason, though, today was the day they decided to make Drew available for interviews. I had requested him earlier this spring. I know other people had as well, and we were told he was not available because he was on the injured list still, even though he was practicing. Today, after Steven said that this is my team, this is my, my offense, Drew comes out and talks today and says all the things that you would expect him to say about the competition and whatnot. He did tell us that the injury was not just a one-game thing. It actually started last May. He said the first time he thinks he tweaked his back in May, was not concerned about it. Then through summer workouts into fall camp, it got aggravated a little bit the more he would do, so they were cutting back his activity a little bit. Got into fall camp, it was bothering him a little bit more. And he says it's actually a hit in the season opener against Southern Miss when he's going for a fumble where he gets hit and he's just got shooting pain down his leg, goes numb a little bit. And from that point on, pretty much every hit over the next 3 weeks made it worse and worse until we get to that first series against New Mexico State where he gets hit on whatever, throws an interception on the last play. It is apparently unable to feel his leg or move or whatever on the sideline. And Steven takes over the offense. They go 62-42, win that game. 7 wins in 11 games. We know how it went from there. And Drew now is not 100%, said he's close to 75 to 80%. Coming back, he will be not play in the spring game on Friday, but will stick around for this summer to work out in hopes of competing for the job. I'll let you listen to what he said here today, and then we'll get some comments on what we think this means for the quarterbacks moving forward.
What are you going to be doing this summer to keep working your way back?
Yeah, so I was pretty excited. I'm actually going to stay here during May and take May classes. I'm going to be able to graduate in August, so I'll be able to graduate fairly early. They're going to have me walk in the May session, but I'm not going to be technically graduated until August. But I'm going to stay here and work out with all the strength coaches and get back. And I know a couple of receivers are going to be staying here, so I'll be able to stay here all May and June, July, and get ready for fall camp. That's the plan.
With graduate transfers are always thing. Are you definitely going to be here in the fall?
Yeah, I plan on going into the MBA program.
What's your relationship with Steven like, and how much did you help him or try to help? Were you able to do that after your surgery last year?
Yeah, well, I was in the meetings and everything. For the most part, I missed a few here and there just with the rehab and stuff like that, but I was pretty much in there all season, and anything I could offer, even on the sidelines, the games that I was able to attend, I was right there, helping him, encouraging him, just doing all those things. And Steve and I have had a great relationship ever since that he's gotten here. There's never been any bad blood or anything. He's great. He did great things last year. We were so happy about it. But no, I was in there, and there's nothing that I thought. I was just saying that there's no problems between us at all, and we have a great workman-like relationship, just bouncing each other. All the quarterbacks do, really, just bouncing things off each other.
That being said, when you're 100% of the fall, are you looking forward to competing for this job
Oh
again?
yeah, that's the plan for sure. Just stay here all summer, get ready, and start the competition back up for fall camp.
So a couple points there. If you didn't catch it, he said he's going to graduate in August, which would make him eligible for a graduate transfer, to where he could go to another FBS program and play immediately. That's what Patrick Tolles did last year. That's what Jeff Badette is doing this year at Oklahoma. So that at least is a factor now. He brought that up without anybody asking. It was on my list of questions to ask, but he brought it up before I even could. But he did say he is going to be here in the fall. He wants to go to the MBA program and then compete for this job. So from everything there, Drew Barker's going to be here in the fall. That's what he says. He's going to want to compete for the job with Steven Johnson. We already told you, we don't think it's competition. We think it's Steven Johnson's team. But you've covered quarterback controversies in the past. You got two guys on this roster who have started games before. Any concern, or is it a positive to have both those guys here?
Yeah, I think it's positive. My couple takeaways are, one, I admire his toughness, but you don't have to wait till you can't feel your legs anymore, to raise the red flag. And I guess it was something that had been monitored and checked out. But, man, if you're a young kid, you're playing football, protect yourself, because that's now you're looking at having to go through. He's gone through a lot now to get back just to this point. Two, you're seeing very wise decisions on this end. Is if you go ahead and apply yourself academically, either you open up an option to leave and be eligible immediately, or now you're in a master's program and you're getting a second degree paid for by a university. So that's using football instead of having football use you. So pretty smart. I think that, again, the shift to Steven Johnson has happened organically. I think that Drew is it's going to take him still more time to get back to 100%. And I think that's it's going to be asking a lot for him to really get back in the race and then have a chance in the race by the time that he is 100% and is getting equal number of reps. So I think that this sets up pretty nicely for Steven Johnson to keep the job.
And that's why I think for me it makes the most sense that Drew will be here in the fall, even though he's graduating, because he said today he's 75 to 80%. Darren Henshaw did say that they fully expect him to be 100% by the fall, but he's still going to be, if he's 100% in August, breaking off some rust and going full go again. And so then you get a year, assuming Steven's the starter, to work your way back to 100%, not being rusty at all. I asked him at the end of his press conference, basically, now that we saw firsthand last year that the backup quarterback has to be ready to go at any moment. Drew Barker goes down the first series of the third game. Steven Johnson takes over, and they kind of go from there. And Drew said,
he got hurt.
Exactly. And he said, Coach Henshaw told us that all the time. And to see that actually happen, it really changes the perspective in that room where all the quarterbacks now are very active. So I would think Drew Barker, it makes sense to be here, to get healthy. Even if you're the backup, Steven Johnson's going to play at 190, 195 pounds this fall, one play away from injury at any moment. He obviously has had issues in the past with fumbles, was not great on his intermediate passes at times. So if he doesn't improve on that, maybe there's a point in the season where Drew becomes another viable option and it makes sense to be here. And even worst case for Drew, at least, Steven's good and makes it through the entire season as a starter. He leaves. That's still another season for Barker to come out and be the starting quarterback in Kentucky. So for me, it only makes sense to stay here for him. The graduate thing will open up more possibilities, but nothing that happened Saturday in terms of what Steven said after the scrimmage and today and talking to Drew Barker has changed my mind at all. Steven Johnson's the quarterback on this team. Drew Barker, if healthy, will be the backup, and we'll see how that plays out into the season.
Yeah, and if Drew, if his attitude remains the same and the standing remains this way, I think Kentucky's in a pretty ideal spot for now and the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they've got guys like Gunnar Hoke, who we've heard good things about this spring, the two freshmen, Danny Clark and Walker Wood. Walker's obviously also working back from injury that he suffered at Lafayette as a senior. We got really good depth there. Davis Mattingly, the walk-on quarterback from Hale, did leave the team this spring. We found that out Saturday. Luke Wright is still on the roster as a walk-on. So you've got 5 scholarship quarterbacks, a 6th guy, and a walk-on who has started a game for Kentucky now since Luke Wright started that Austin Peay game last year. So they're in really good shape depth-wise. I do not think all 6 of those guys are going to end their careers at Kentucky. Quarterbacks are made to transfer. That's just how it works. But for now, I think all 5 of those guys the scholarship guys are going to be here in the fall, and that's a pretty good situation for this team, I think.
It is, and this is this might not be that big of a deal, but that's a lot of players to throw passes in practice for all those skill guys, and then also you've got with those freshman quarterbacks, Walker Wood, Danny Clark. Those are 2 different types for scout team purposes. So, like you said, from top to bottom, and any situation or circumstance you could come up with that you need a quarterback for, right now Kentucky's in a pretty good spot.
Well, that's about all the time we've got today. Hit a lot of basketball, spring football. The spring game is Friday night at Commonwealth Stadium. We'll be back next Monday to break down whatever happens in that spring game. Probably will be more basketball recruiting and roster news by then. Looking forward to the Derby Classic and all those situations. Until then, I'm John Hale at JohnHale_CJ on Twitter. He's at Fletcher Page on Twitter. Follow us there. Like the CatsHQ page on Facebook. And we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.